Us for this inaugural Peat Metal webinar, the first of a series of 4 that we've got planned at the moment, and we'll release more dates and titles over the summer for our autumn webinars. So I won't tell you too much about the project because Gareth's going to do that in a second, but just a little bit of housekeeping for the moment. If you could keep your audio, your microphones turned off, because I can see a few people have still got theirs turned on, just so you don't disturb the speakers. We will have 2 talks today. The first one from Gareth Clay, who is the PI of the Peat Metal project. He's going to tell you a little bit about what we'll be doing throughout the course of the project, talk through ways to get involved in future. And then we've got our first research talk from Peter Beckett. We are going to record the talks, and then though we will stop recording for the Q&A, and we'll run both talks back to back, and then there'll be time for the Q&A at the end. Okay, so Adam, do you want to start recording?
Yeah, that started.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so first up, we're going to hear from Gareth Clay. He is a reader in physical geography here at the University of Manchester with me and Adam, and his research interests are in peatlands, carbon cycling and fire. So I'll let him take it over from here. Thanks, Gareth.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks, everyone. Good to see everybody. Good to see some faces I've not seen for a while, so you're all very welcome. So as Emma said, I'll speak for about 5–10 minutes about the project and the kind of the aims of the project, and a few ways in which you might want to get involved or how we might collaborate further. So this is a large collaboration. This is a project that spans 3 countries through the UK, Canada and Ireland. Its full title is Disturbance and Restoration of Metal Contaminated Peatlands, but that's a bit of a mouthful, so we affectionately refer to it as Peat Metal. This is a project funded by the UK's Natural Environment Research Council, and I'll spend a little bit more time talking about that later on. But why do we think this is an important project to be working on? Well, some of you, I hope many of you, will kind of appreciate the importance of peatlands at a global and regional level. We often think about them in terms of their carbon storage, their biodiversity, but for our purposes today, they're also an important location for the storage of industrial metals, for example, from the Industrial Revolution or other activities, right the way back to the Roman period, smelting and so on. So regionally, they're really important as sinks of toxic metals and metalloids. I'll be using metals, but we can also think about metalloids as well. We also can think about kind of how peatlands function, and we know that they are regulated through a series of kind of interconnecting feedbacks, and under normal circumstances, that maintains the hydrological resilience, maintains the carbon storage, and so on. But we know that they're being threatened by various climatic and other environmental perturbations, making them more or less resilient, perhaps living in a more challenging environment with climate change and other environmental stresses. So that makes many of our peatland landscapes, and particularly those where we have the storage of industrial pollutants, more susceptible to further disturbances. So again, the compounding disturbances like climate change, as well as things like fire, drainage, and so on, mean that potentially we are then releasing those legacy pollutants into the environment, whether that's the terrestrial environment, aquatic, atmospheric, and so on. So we have a challenge. We have a potential really kind of nasty challenge on our hands. So people have been working and looking at peatlands and metal contamination for many decades. In fact, this goes back many decades. And I've just pulled out a couple of good examples. A paper by Lee and Tallis just over 50 years ago, I guess, looking at metal contamination in the peatlands around Manchester, up in the Peak District National Parks, not too far from where the Manchester lot are today. Bringing that up to kind of recent history, a large research paper, a big collaborative paper out last year, early this year, and as part of the global microbiome project, there's a load of metal data as well. So we have been working on peatlands and metals and disturbances for a long time. However, we've got a range of different disciplinary perspectives. So it might be approaching it from a biogeochemical perspective, ecological, archaeological, and so on. So in the context of the environmental challenges previously mentioned, how do we bring all this great knowledge and the existing knowledge together into alignment to help tackle this environmental challenge? And really, some of the inspiration for this networking grant around peatlands, disturbances and metals comes from a series of conversations that a number of us have been having that really kind of crystallized in a paper that Colin McCarter at Nipissing, who's on the call today, hi Colin, led last year, outlining some of those kind of known, unknown research challenges and questions around peat fires, metals and peatlands. And you can go and have a look at this. It's in environmental research letters, and I would say strongly encourage you all to go and have a look at it. But in essence, we have three kind of core areas of kind of questions to look at. The geography of where our polluted peatlands are, so limited kind of historical accurate deposition maps, uncertainty in the depth of the accumulation of that metal. We need to know a bit more about kind of how climate change is going to impact on peatlands, both in terms of those kind of eco-hydrological feedbacks and what that means for, say, the biogeochemistry of the metals, but also things like how climate change impacts on the depth of burn in fires. And then laid on top of that, kind of the much more interactive processes in the connection between hydrology, biology, and geochemistry. So that really sets out the context for this project. And as I said, this is funded by the UK's Natural Environment Research Council. It started actually about a year and a bit ago, but for various reasons, we've kind of only now been able to get the webinars off the ground. So the funding actually runs out in September, but the plan is to keep this going beyond the lifetime of the funded grant. And it's known as a global partnership seed corn fund. It's very much about bringing people together, connecting teams and encouraging and supporting new research ideas and collaboration. So there's a little bit of money for kind of some core research, things like literature reviews and some experimental work. But in essence, it's very much a networking grant, and the webinar series is part of that and kind of connecting teams. So we are very much really interested to hear about research projects going on in this space. We've talked about peat metal. We've got the Pipes project led by Graham Swindles and co at Queen's University Belfast. Colin's just been awarded a major NSERC grant as well. So again, there's lots of great stuff going on, but one of the things that we maybe sometimes need to be better at is kind of connecting and sharing all of our great expertise and successes. So if you're working in this area, you've got kind of collaborations ongoing, please let us know. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in the next couple of slides. As Emma says, we've got the webinar series. This is the first of 4 this spring. The autumn series is in development. So if you'd be interested in speaking about peatlands, fires, disturbances and metals, do let us know. Or if you have ideas of people we should tap up, again, do reach out. Many of the team are going to be at a number of conferences over the next few months, and I'm sure other people on the call will be attending, the likes of European Geosciences Union, Canadian Geophysical Union, or the International Geographical Congress in Dublin. And Ken Byrne on this call has a session around peatlands to which we have a talk in at. So if you are at any of these conferences, do give us a shout. We're more than happy to have a coffee, a bit of a chat about work going on. And equally, if you've got events that are coming up that you think the network and the wider community might be interested in, again, do let us know. So part of what this project, the Peat Metal team, are going to do is kind of think about how we set up a shared community space to kind of keep in touch with each other between these webinars and between kind of conference events and so on. And really, it's about keeping those conversations going. So we've been exploring options, and Adam has been looking at options for us, and Discord is likely to be a good space in which we can share ideas. So do keep an eye on the website for further details about how to engage with that. And again, future webinars will give you a heads up on that as well. So that's it really from me. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour as to kind of what this is all about, but it's very much about connecting people. So do keep in touch. Project website is there. And if you want to email us some ideas, or if you've got a great opportunity coming up, drop us an email. We'd be very much glad to hear of your input. Okay, I'll stop there.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gareth. I will pop the links and the email address in the chat at some point, so people can have just copy and paste those as needed. We won't take questions now, but if you do have any questions for Gareth, please do put them in the chat and we will field those at the end. Also, if you've got any questions for Peter as he's talking, please pop those in the chat as well. But I will hand over in a second once he's got his slides set up to Peter Beckett, who is Emeritus Professor in Biology at Laurentian University. And his work for a long time is focused on the ecological restoration of smelter-damaged Sudbury peatlands, which he's going to talk to you about now. So I'll hand over to you then, Peter.
Okay, you see my slides and you can hear me.
Yes.
That's
Brilliant.
great. I will continue. It's going to be, in effect, one of the many stories about peatlands and other kinds of restoration in Sudbury. I'm not the only person working in the area, but I'm going to concentrate on things that I've been involved in. And in this particular talk, a recent graduate student, James Seward, has done much of the work, and he has moved on to become a postdoctoral in Tim Moore's lab at McGill. But I first of all would like to start, as we always do in Canada, with a land acknowledgement, thanking the Indigenous people who looked after and stewarded this land for 10,000 years, in particularly the Chicken Machine Anishinaabeg and the Wanapitei First Nations. All the work that we'll be talking about today is on their traditional lands. So we're going to Sudbury, which today is a very green city. This is not the image of Sudbury that many people have because of the industrial legacy. And where we're actually going, there's a map here. Sudbury is here, Toronto here, Ottawa here. And I know some people on the call are coming to Canada in May, so I'm just trying to let you know where you're coming. If we zero in a little bit more to Sudbury, I'm going to be talking more about this area in a moment. But if we go out onto the landscape, even near the university, into local conservation area, everything with a W here is a wetland. Okay? And these wetlands really consist of two kinds. They may be peatlands, shown on the left here, or marshes. They're probably our main two classes. And this is actually from the City Biodiversity website, which is a special interactive poster for school kids to learn about wetlands in the Sudbury area. So if we go out to a peatland outside the immediate area of Sudbury, this is one about 100 kilometers away, and we go into that peatland. This might be the kind of vegetation that we might see. There'll be trees where they occur, particularly black spruce, and also there's tamarack there. There are a whole lot of ericoid shrubs, which leatherleaf, Chamaedaphne, is usually the most dominant. There'll be others within that group, things like bog laurel and sheep laurel, bog rosemary, Labrador tea, large and small, and the bog cranberry. And I actually collect cranberries from one of my research sites, so that I may have cranberries with my Thanksgiving dinner. Okay, and then there's a number of cotton grasses, such as the tawny cotton grass shown here, a pile of sedges, which these three are fairly prominent. And if we're really lucky and they're at the right time in July, we will see some of the fen and bog orchids. And we can't forget the peat mosses. So this actually is from a student poster in my wetland course, showing the 10 sort of most important sphagnum mosses that we might find on a typical wetland in the Sudbury area. And I'm not going to go through a taxonomic list for you now. You can see them all. You can see them all there. Okay. So what has actually happened in Sudbury? And in this talk, we're really talking about what's happened in Sudbury since the appearance of the Europeans in the area, which occurred in the 19th century. And of course, they came here first for the timber, and one of the key trees was white pine. And a lot of that actually went across to England to build your ships and the masts, and that was right. So, of course, the forest should have come back, but then there was the discovery of the nickel and copper as the CPR line, the Trans-Canada rail line, was being put through in the 1880s, leading to the start of the mining. At first, the ore was taken to roast yards, okay, and the sulfur was roasted off into the surrounding atmosphere. Later, everything was consolidated into 3 major smelters, of which 2 remain today. They had roasting and smelting and much higher temperatures, and gave off large amounts of metal particulates, and these are some of the weather particulates taken from the university campus. They, with the very acid soils generated from all the sulfur dioxide interacting with water, then one got these metal particulates being leached to give us a whole host of metals. If you actually go into Sudbury, you can find everything in the periodic table, but some of the main elements will be nickel, copper, iron, cadmium, cobalt, arsenic, okay, being leached out of these particles into the surrounding top layers of the soils and peatlands. So this resulted in here are the 3 smelters. This one's now shut. A barren area, essentially, as they became known in Sudbury, about 17,000 hectares, which would include a number of peatlands as well. And then an area, a semi-barren area, another 64,000 hectares, which in the past had a stunted forest, particularly of birch and maple. And also, there would have been effects on the wetlands, peatlands in this area. And of course, in recent years, there have been improvements. First, of course, there's been lots of controls on the industry and rebuilding the smelters. And so, since the maximum liberation of sulfur dioxide in the 1960s of 2.5 million tons of sulfur dioxide per year, then with all the controls and rebuilding, we're now controlling something like 97–95% of all the emissions. So actually, for those people coming to Sudbury in May, it will be a very clean city for you. Yeah. Okay. Also, but I don't have it on this thing. Also, there's been a similar reduction in the amount of particulates being released from the smelters. So, this then is a picture of the Sudbury landscape in 1978–79, showing that one needed to regreen the area. This is what the same area looks like now. How is this done on the uplands? The addition of dolomitic limestone, a nurse crop of grasses and legumes, and then coming back in and planting trees. And these days we're up to using different 80 species of trees and shrubs. Something like 3,500 hectares have been treated, and over 10 million trees have been planted. and the 10th millionth tree, for the record, was planted by Jane Goodall along with the Prime Minister of Canada a couple of years ago. And so if we look at that same map, anything in green is areas which have been treated by the Sudbury, the city of Sudbury, actually, re-greening program. But there are peatlands in this area, and of course beyond this area, and they perhaps form about 14% of the area, if you like, relatively small to the upland areas. So the regreening program up to now has concentrated on the upland areas. But now maybe it's time for the peatlands. There was a study done, myself and another former graduate student, way back in the 1980s, where we looked at a series of peatlands around one of the smelters. And the peatlands at that time, especially the ones near the smelters, looked as bad as the uplands, but black with virtually nothing growing. And one could not see any peat mosses on these sites until one got at least 12 kilometers away from the smelter. So when James came along, he wished to reanalyze all of these sites to see since the pollution reduction had been occurring, had there been any signs of natural recolonization and what else might be going on in some of these sites. So this is what he did. He did a vegetation survey using transects and quadrats. He took samples of some of the peat mosses when they occurred for chemical analysis. Also, the top layers of the peat, and of course then the samples were dried, and one used an ICP to look for a suite of elements, and then the comparisons were made with the 1986 data. He also took samples and it looked at the microbial communities as well. And finally, once we started to see the good news, we started a small transplant experiment. So these are the things I'm going to be talking about from now on. These are the sites. The Falconbush smelter is here. Okay. Up. In red, downtown Sudbury is over here. So the number of sites from the ones which were investigated in 1986, going out a distance of about 80 kilometers. And if one looks at the results for some of the sites, then we have distance along the bottom. Oops. Distance along the bottom, and the number of peat mosses that were being found are in red, and the other vascular plants are in blue. One might have expected a nice kind of relationship with distance, but that didn't happen. The more interesting things going on of what was going on nearer the smelter. Okay. All right. Because good, it started moving again. It was stuck. Up to a distance about 12 kilometers, there were sites now which had peat mosses in them, which didn't have them before, and some of them actually had, one of them at least had 5 different kinds of sphagnum within it. So this in the black here represents the area in which now one has the sphagnum mosses in the sites, but one didn't have them in 1985, 1986. Comparison of the species number at the sites between the 2 years. This is 2021. The black is 1986. The interesting thing is that we can split this into 3 zones. Still have the near sites. See? Okay, there's more vegetation there than there used to be. We can't go to these sites anymore because they have been regreened by the mining company. So there's still a lower number of species. Then there's an intermediate zone, and then a zone further away from about 35 kilometers, which should start to resemble kind of background sites. One of the differences in terms of species numbers that, in particularly in 2021, we weren't always there at the right time of the year to get all the sedges and the grasses, hence the difference. So this is one of the sites very close to a smelter. This one's only 3 kilometers from the smelter. It does have a number of peat mosses, so they may not be showing up too well in here. It actually has 3 species of peat moss on them. But if one does an ordination on all the vegetation data and does a comparison between 1986 and 2001, on the right are the 1986 sites, okay, and essentially going this way kind of corresponds with distance, and kind of corresponds with, to some extent, with an increase in species. But we can see the 86. We can see the 2021 sites, and this site in here is a reference site north of Sudbury. Okay, so there is a shift. Okay, but there's still the effect, to some extent, of distance on the kind of vegetation that one can see. If we go out and look at the peat, the peat collected in association with the peat mosses where they were found. This is the results for copper. This is the drop off in 1986. Maximum levels and the sites right in by the smelter. This is total copper of 800. Okay, we unfortunately don't have the close-in sites now. As I said, they've been regreened, but the highest levels you find that there's still metal there. Okay, the highest levels in kind of the order of 100 micrograms per gram, and also kind of falls off with distance. Okay, we'd get the same kind of pattern with nickel, and of course nickel and copper are probably the two most important elements in the Sudbury area. If we kind of compare the lines for copper and nickel in terms of the concentrations in the peatland, there's been a drop off of 80 to 90% in the surface layers of the peat. Okay, if we look at the moss itself, then there is still some metals in the moss from the close-in sites, both copper and nickel and others. This may be the fact that they are managing to get some metal from the contaminated or less contaminated peat below, or there may still be some aerial deposition in the area, or a mixture of both. James, in particular, is interested in the microbes. He actually came as a microbiologist, but he kind of got pushed into looking at vegetation as well, because I'm a botanist. Okay? So he looked at the microbes. Okay, and so these are his results looking at beta diversity, okay, Bay Curtis, for the microbes we can find in the peat and in the sphagnum, and they're pretty distinct kind of populations, okay. And if these are okay, what was found, okay, in the peat mosses, or Sphagnum falx, Sphagnum rubellum, Sphagnum fimbriatum, in particular, Sphagnum, yes, and Sphagnum fuscum, okay. These are what was found in associated with the peat mosses along the gradient. Again, it's a quite a complex pattern, but if we break it down, then there were three groups, okay, which were showing up. The proteobacteria, about 60%, okay, of the determinations. The acidiobacteria, something like 12%, and the planktomyces another 8%. They will make up most of the microbial population. There was also a relationship with the microtopography of the peat mosses. So if we look on the right, okay, there are distinct differences between between the microbes associated with the species in the hollow, and then with the lawn and with the hummock. Quite interesting to me, the hummock and the hummock, you know, much more distinct, and the lawn, which of course is intermediate, is actually showing up as intermediate here. Whether this is due to pure topography, or whether it's actually due to the species, the sphagnum species occupying these microsites, right? Is a point of discussion. Okay. If we look at the microbial communities in the peat, okay, then these are the closer sites. These are the sort of sites further away, and this is there were differences there, and it appears that these differences might be influenced by the concentrations of the copper and nickel. Okay, of course, sites here, the further sites further away, as well as the pH. Okay. And if we look again at the distribution in the peat, then again, if we look at the same three groups, then the acidiobacteria about a third, the proteobacteria about 30%, and in the third group, a different to in the peat mosses, the varicon microcabulia are about 10%. Well, with the peat mosses coming back and the sites beginning to look normal, the sites that James worked on from the one smelter, there was peat mosses in pretty well all the sites. But there are other sites closer to another smelter in Sudbury where there are no peat mosses, as shown in this site here. It's dominated by Cabendaphne. So as the final part of a species, we decided we might actually try a small transplant experiment in these metal contaminated peatlands. This is partly for the people coming in May. This is the university on 5 lakes. We will be going to this site, this transplant site, just south of the university, and it's very dominated by Cabendaphne. Lots of bare peat. It's wet sometimes in the year. It will be very wet right now. There's 15 centimeters of water over the surface in the summer. This will dry out and will become quite compact and hard. Okay, it also is high in metals. So this is the site here. It's high in copper and nickel, even higher compared with some of the other sites along James Transect. To obtain the peat mosses, they came from the donor site south of Sudbury, and these are the metal levels in that donor site, very low. What was transplanted with the help of people from James Waddington's group and others, because this site here is one of James Waddington's research sites. It acted as a governor 160 kilometers south of Sudbury. And again, I think those people coming to in May will see this site. Okay, 5 species that were common on this peatland were transplanted: Phalax, Fuscum, Magellanicum, Palustri, and Cuspidatum. This was a kind of a general arrangement. The idea was to try and put them in on the Sudbury transplant site. There are hollows and small hollows and hummocks, basically of Chamaedaphne, was to try and put them in their right microhabitat, right, on the Sudbury site. Okay. So Cuspidatum was in the wetter areas, and Fuscum was up on the hummocks. A little higher up, Phalax and Palustri, and on the lower hummocks was some Magellanicum. Well, the results were black. Palustri and Cuspidatum did not survive. However, Sphagnum Phalax, Sphagnum Fuscum, and Sphagnum Magellanicum survived for at least 3 years. Why do we think the Palustri and the Cuspidatum did not survive? I think it's due to the conditions of the site have been very wet, flooded at certain times of the year, and extremely dry in the middle of the summer. The 3 species which did survive then were Sphagnum Phalax and Fuscum and Magellanicum, and maybe they have better tolerance towards drought, and also perhaps some tolerance to some of the metals, but this needs further investigation. Some pictures of this. Here is the Magellanicum. It's lost its color. Okay, and it did not grow too well. It is surviving. That's probably about the best word to put it. It is surviving, but not doing too much. Okay, Sphagnum Phalax. Then from summer, when it was a dry summer in May, the year I first put into right now, it's actually beginning to spread. Okay, and produce new colonies in some of the damper hollows. Okay, Sphagnum Fuscum has actually increased both in terms of the thickness of the moss, as well as spreading out and spreading over the hummocks, and now is actually beginning to get colonized by things like Pelicticum strictum and other species as it is spreading. Okay. So, and then the latest pictures that I actually went out this week to see where I could get the latest one, but everything except the Fuscum is underwater. So this shows if you like, the 2 best species in terms of surviving and colonizing and expanding, Fuscum and the Phalax. What about chemistry then associated with these sites? So this we have here the the donor site and the transplant site for a number of elements. Okay, okay, and I can't see the whole slide at the moment because of everything else that's on the Zoom. But the net effect of this that okay, once the things have been transplanted, we get higher levels of nickel, copper, and aluminum in those transplants compared to the donor site. Okay. Oops. The same also with iron. Okay. But there is very little phosphorus okay, in the living transplants. Okay. If we look at a comparison between the different surviving species, then Fuscum overall has the lowest accumulation of metals, and Phalax has the highest. This may be a reflection of if you like, the microtopography. The Phalax is higher up. Maybe it loses metals, or they get leached out by rain during some of the year, whereas the Phalax is down in the wetter areas, and maybe it's simply absorbing metals from the solution on the site. Okay. One interesting thing is the fairly higher levels of aluminum in the peat. Okay, at the transplant site. This is probably a reflection of the fact that soil has got washed off the surrounding areas into the site in the past, and really one has a mixture of peat with soil, and the aluminum is dissolving out of the soil. Okay, and iron is extremely high as well. And again, this may have come from past pollution, or it may also come from the particles being washed into the transplant site. Looking at the microbes, the distinct difference between the microbe community in the donor moss, okay, and the transplant moss, but and if one looks at the peat, okay, this is the donor peat, and then the host peat, but the peat underneath the peat moss is becoming kind of a mixture. So there is a shift in the communities associated with the moss and the peat on the transplant site. So there's very little sphagnum in the peat moss, even though there is some very little phosphorus in the peat moss, even though there is it is not particularly limiting in the site as a whole, but high levels of aluminum and iron. And also, if one was looking at the microbes in the state, the esterales are actually, which are fairly high, are also known to prevent phosphorus uptake in at least some vasculous plants. So they may be doing the same with the peat mosses. Okay. And also with the iron and the aluminum, it may be binding with the phosphorus that is there and stopping it from being taken up by the peat moss. So there's now a sphagnum close to the smelters, as well, which is a testament then shows a positive effect from all of the pollution controls. there's still nickel and copper and other elements found in the peat, so the levels are much lower. The microbes in the slag and peat are dissimilar, and the topography of the sites, the topography of the sites along the species may be affecting the communities of microbes that one actually gets. So all in all, I think this says maybe the Sudbury peatlands ready now for restoration. And this, of course, is the topic of the new Alliance grant that Colin, who has already been mentioned, has got, along with other co-investigators, Ellie Good from St. Mary's, Pete Whittaker from Brandon, and Nate Basilico from Lakehead. They are looking at a number of issues to try and understand what's going on in these peatlands more, particularly at some of the elements, the metals, whether even what kind of metals can the peat mosses really stand, and also going to be looking at carbon. Okay. And they have picked sites along the concentrations that James and I know about, a kind of control north of Sudbury, a heavy polluted site on the Laurentian campus, and then sites further away down the same gradient that James has worked on. And so they're going to look more, and also they're going to look where possible at the effects of what the upland liming and restoration may be doing on the peatlands, and trying some other techniques for the peatland restoration. As always, a large number of people involved in the projects, and so none of this would have been possible without them. And I think at this time I'm going to stop, and we'll take any questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Peter, for an interesting talk. I can see little claps coming up in the emojis. Thank you. So is there anybody